It was a typical Wednesday morning at Taylor's Elite Auto Gallery, a high-end car dealership nestled in the heart of Los Angeles. The sun blazed down on the polished glass windows, reflecting the gleaming chrome of the luxury cars inside. Chris Taylor stood behind the sleek reception desk, scanning the floor with a trained eye. Today was supposed to be just another day, just another sales pitch. But little did Chris know, everything was about to change. The dealership was busy, as usual, with a steady stream of customers eyeing the newest Lamborghinis, Ferraris, and Rolls-Royces. Chris had built this place from the ground up. He wasn't about to let anything disrupt his day-to-day rhythm. He had a reputation to maintain. At 35, he was one of the youngest managers in the industry. But ambition came with its own set of problems. Chris had learned the hard way that success in a cutthroat business like this meant not letting anything, or anyone, get in the way. That morning, a customer walked into the showroom that Chris almost didn't notice at first. A man in his early 50s, dressed in a dark, nondescript hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, nothing that screamed billionaire or entrepreneur. Chris immediately dismissed him as another tire kicker, someone just browsing for fun. Chris was all too familiar with people like him, those who had no real intention of buying but liked the idea of playing rich. "Can I help you?" Chris asked, glancing up from his phone. He was in the middle of a call with a high-profile client in Dubai and wasn't in the mood for tire kickers today. The man looked around, nodding toward the cars in the showroom. "I'm just looking," he said, his voice casual, almost indifferent. Chris sighed. Another one of these guys, he thought to himself. He was used to them. They'd walk around, pretend they could afford the cars, maybe take a few pictures, and then leave without a second thought. "Feel free to look around," Chris said flatly, turning his attention back to his phone. The man began walking slowly through the showroom, eyeing the cars but not touching anything. As Chris went on with his call, he couldn't help but notice the man's casual gait, the way he moved, calm and deliberate. Something about him seemed different, but Chris quickly shrugged it off. People were always full of surprises. About 15 minutes later, Chris's attention was pulled away from his conversation by a loud clearing of the man's throat. He looked up to see the same man standing near the Bentley section, a slight frown on his face. The man was now holding his phone in his hand, his fingers scrolling through something intently. Chris raised an eyebrow. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, his voice now laced with impatience. "I told you already, we're not doing test drives today unless you're ready to buy." The man glanced at Chris, then slowly lowered his phone. "Actually, I'm here to inquire about your inventory," he said, his tone still casual but with an edge of authority. "I'm looking for a few specific models for my team." Chris felt a flicker of irritation, but it was quickly replaced by his usual professionalism. This was his job. To sell. "We've got plenty of inventory," Chris said, walking over to the man with a forced smile. "Let me know which ones catch your eye, and I'll get you the details." The man pointed to a black Bentley Continental GT, its curves gleaming under the bright lights of the showroom. "That one," he said, a slight smile playing at his lips. "How much?" Chris's fingers hovered over the tablet in his hand, ready to pull up the pricing information. He wasn't quite prepared for the next line of conversation. "Well, we don't typically disclose prices on the floor," Chris said, attempting to sound professional. "But I can tell you it's a serious investment. You'd be looking at over $250,000. The man interrupted, leaning in to inspect the car up close. "I think I might take a few of them." Chris paused, blinked. "A few?" he repeated, surprised by the boldness of the statement. Most customers who came in only inquired about one. "A few Bentleys?" "Yes," the man replied, his gaze now fully absorbed in the car. "The price isn't an issue." Chris's mind was racing. Could this be another dreamer, someone who was only interested in the luxury of it all but not willing to pull the trigger on a purchase? "I'm happy to work out a deal for you," Chris said with a thin smile, trying to regain control of the conversation. "We have a variety of models here, and if you're looking to buy in bulk, we can talk discounts." The man nodded but didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked out toward the window, his eyes scanning the street as if he were deep in thought. Just as Chris opened his mouth to speak again, the man turned back, a smirk appearing on his face. "I know a thing or two about buying in bulk. In fact," he paused, and there was a slight twinkle in his eye, "I think you're going to want to hear about what I have planned next." Chris's curiosity was piqued, but before he could reply, a sharp voice broke through the silence. "Chris!" A tall woman, dressed in a sharp business suit, hurried toward him. It was Linda, the dealership's marketing director. "There's a situation in the service area," she said, her tone clipped. Chris glanced at the man in front of him, his brows furrowed. The conversation was clearly shifting, but Chris didn't like interruptions. "I'll be right there," he said, his tone cold. He turned to the man. "I'm afraid I have to step out for a moment. We'll resume this when I'm back." The man nodded without protest, and Chris left the showroom in a huff, frustration bubbling up inside him. "Who does this guy think he is?" he thought, his mind drifting back to the peculiar customer. But little did Chris know, the person he had just dismissed, without a second thought, was none other than Elon Musk. And he was no ordinary customer. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Chris Taylor wasn't born into a world of luxury. In fact, he had come from humble beginnings, growing up in a small suburban neighborhood just outside of Chicago. His family, though loving, was far from wealthy. His father worked as a mechanic, and his mother managed a small local grocery store. They had always done their best to provide for Chris and his younger sister, Jenna, but there was never much extra to go around. From a young age, Chris had been determined to break out of the cycle of financial struggle. He didn't want to work with his hands like his father, no offense to the trade. He had bigger dreams. He wanted a life where money wasn't something he had to constantly worry about. He wanted to be the guy people looked at with envy, the one who drove the fancy cars and wore the suits. He wanted to prove that he could rise above. And so, after high school, Chris moved to Los Angeles to start fresh. He'd never been intimidated by big city life, knowing that it was the perfect place for someone with ambition. He found a job at a small dealership selling used luxury cars, earning just enough to cover rent and food, but it wasn't long before he realized the potential of the business. Within a few years, he worked his way up to a managerial position at one of the top dealerships in LA, Taylor's Elite Auto Gallery. The name had changed slightly, but Chris had built it up from a local, run-of-the-mill dealership into a place known for offering high-end cars to wealthy clients who were more interested in showing off their latest purchases than actually driving them. His promotion was a culmination of years of hard work, of endless hours spent perfecting his pitch and negotiating deals. He had earned the right to sit behind the desk, the right to call the shots, the right to be in control. And with that power came a certain arrogance. Chris had always believed that the world of high-end luxury cars was built on hard work, and he was damn good at his job. But as his success grew, so did his sense of superiority. It wasn't about the cars anymore, it was about the status. The high-end clients, the exclusive deals, the deals that no one else could get. He wasn't just selling cars anymore, he was selling prestige. Every morning, Chris would walk into the dealership, his head held high, a firm smile on his face, as if he were entering his own kingdom. The sales team followed his lead, the service department deferred to him, and the clients were there to be impressed. The showroom was a carefully curated collection of the most expensive, most exclusive cars money could buy. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bentleys, names that brought both envy and admiration. Chris made sure everything was pristine, that every car was in perfect condition for the rich, discerning customers who walked through the door. But despite all the success, there was one thing Chris had never truly achieved: genuine happiness. Sure, he had a decent social circle, clients who respected his business acumen, but no real friends. No one who understood the pressure he was under. No one who really got what it was like to constantly battle for a bigger piece of the pie, to always be chasing the next sale, the next deal. And there was no one at home either. His relationships were shallow, his romantic life non-existent. Chris had no time for anything except his dealership, his ambition, and the endless need to prove himself. The luxury cars, the expensive suits, the meetings with high-profile clients, they were all part of a carefully constructed persona, one that Chris knew was the only way to survive in this cutthroat world. And then there was Jake. Jake was Chris's best friend and the one person who could still break through Chris's hard exterior. They had met at the dealership a few years ago, when Jake had been a mechanic in the service department. They'd bonded over late-night drinks and shared frustrations, and Jake had quickly become Chris's confidant and sounding board. Jake understood Chris's drive better than anyone, he also knew just how fragile Chris's ego was. But despite their friendship, Jake wasn't afraid to tell Chris when he was being too arrogant, when his decisions were driven by pride rather than practicality. "Man, you can't keep acting like you're better than everyone just because you sell some expensive cars," Jake had warned him once after a particularly heated argument with a client. "Not everyone here is just trying to keep up with the Joneses. Some people actually appreciate what a car can do. What it represents." But Chris didn't always listen. To him, the world was black and white, you either made the deal or you didn't. You were either a success or a failure. It was that simple. His overconfidence had worked for him so far, but now, as he stood behind the desk in his office overlooking the showroom floor, something gnawed at him. The phone call from his boss, Mr. Lawson, had been a wake-up call. Taylor's elite auto gallery was in serious competition with other dealerships, many of which had bigger budgets and even more extravagant showrooms. There was always someone ready to take his place. And if Chris didn't find a way to stand out, to keep making the right deals, he would lose it all. That's why the conversation with the mysterious man earlier had left him feeling unsettled. Who was he? Why had Chris been so quick to dismiss him? He had that nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach, like something important had slipped through his fingers. But there was no time to dwell on it. Chris turned his attention back to his schedule, and with a deep breath, he squared his shoulders. Today would be like every other day. He would put the incident with the man behind him and focus on the tasks at hand. After all, a manager like Chris couldn't afford to show weakness. As Chris clicked through emails and checked on the status of a few deals, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change. The dealership was growing, sure, but so were the challenges. The high-end world he had created was fragile, and he couldn't afford to take anything for granted. Maybe it was time to stop thinking he knew everything and start opening himself up to the possibilities that lay beyond his carefully curated world. He looked out the window of his office, staring down at the shining cars below. Everything could change in an instant, he thought, but for now, it was business as usual. It was only a few hours after Chris's encounter with the mysterious customer, and the dealership was buzzing with activity. A handful of customers roamed the showroom floor, eyeing the latest luxury models, while salespeople walked around, offering assistance. But Chris couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. The day was dragging on, and the usual excitement that came with securing a big sale felt distant. As Chris sat in his office, reviewing the numbers for the week, his thoughts kept drifting back to that strange conversation. Who was that guy? He had come in dressed like he was just another shopper, yet he had spoken with an authority Chris wasn't used to encountering in casual buyers. He was certainly no tire kicker. Chris leaned back in his chair, staring at the calendar on his desk. The dealership had always been Chris's domain, and he'd worked tirelessly to make it what it was. His success had been built on a delicate balance of ambition, calculated risk, and, at times, sheer luck. But the unsettling encounter with the man had thrown him off balance, making him question whether everything he had worked for could be so easily disrupted. That evening, the dealership closed for the night, and the staff trickled out one by one. Chris stayed behind, lingering in his office, feeling an odd mixture of unease and curiosity. His mind kept returning to the man, his casual demeanor, his confident air. There was something about him, something Chris couldn't quite place, but it was starting to drive him crazy. Maybe he was overthinking it. After all, it was just one customer, right? There had been plenty of walk-ins in the past, people who wandered in with no intention of buying anything. But something about this man felt different. "Hey, Chris, you good?" Jake's voice came from the open door of Chris's office, breaking his train of thought. Jake had a way of showing up at the right moment, always knowing when Chris was deep in thought or when something wasn't right. Chris sat up and glanced at his friend, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just catching up on some numbers." "What's up?" Jake walked into the office, leaning against the doorframe. "You've been a little off today. Something on your mind?" Chris sighed and leaned back in his chair. "It's that guy from earlier today. You know, the one who came in looking for the Bentleys." Jake raised an eyebrow. "The guy in the hoodie? What about him?" Chris ran a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. "I don't know, man. He came in like he was just browsing, but then he drops this comment about buying a few of the cars. No one does that unless they're serious, right? I just feel like there's something I missed." Jake gave a knowing smile, but it wasn't one of reassurance. "You're overthinking it. Maybe he's just another wealthy guy who's a little eccentric. The kind who likes to window shop and talk big to see how the salespeople react. Trust me, we've had plenty of them." Chris shook his head. "It's not that. This guy was different. I can't explain it, but it was like he wasn't trying to impress me. It was almost as if he was testing me." Jake chuckled, his arms crossed. "Well, you know what they say, never underestimate a customer, especially when they've got money to burn. I wouldn't lose sleep over it, Chris. But hey, if it's really bugging you, you could always check the records. Maybe we've sold a car to him before." Chris's eyes narrowed as he mulled over the idea. "That's not a bad idea." After a few moments of silence, Chris stood up, pacing around the office. He wasn't sure why, but the more he thought about it, the more the man felt like a puzzle that needed solving. Something told him that the encounter wasn't as random as it seemed. It was too calculated, too deliberate. As he pulled up the records on his computer, Chris found that the name wasn't familiar. He quickly ran a search for the customer's name. There was no record. But the feeling that something wasn't right wouldn't leave him. The man hadn't given a name, just mentioned "my team" as if it was an afterthought. Chris leaned forward in his chair, staring at the screen, mind racing. Who was this guy? What if he was more than just another wealthy buyer? Chris had dealt with billionaires and celebrities before, but this man didn't fit any of the usual profiles. He wasn't the flashy, attention-grabbing type. He was subtle, understated, but there was a cool confidence about him that Chris couldn't ignore. Jake, sensing that his friend was spiraling, stood up and clapped Chris on the shoulder. "Look, you're chasing shadows. If the guy shows up again, fine. But until then, don't waste your energy. You've got bigger fish to fry. We're trying to make this dealership the biggest and best in the city, right? Focus on that." Chris wasn't convinced, but he nodded slowly. "I hear you. I guess I'm just on edge." Jake smiled, giving his friend one last look before heading for the door. "Take it easy, man. We'll get through this." As Jake left, Chris remained in his office, staring out at the empty showroom floor. His thoughts raced as he tried to shake the feeling that something was looming just around the corner, something he wasn't prepared for. Later that night, after locking up and leaving the dealership, Chris couldn't let go of the nagging curiosity. He felt unsettled, as if something was out of place, something he hadn't even noticed yet. It was more than just the man from earlier, it was the way everything was beginning to feel fragile, as if the empire Chris had built could be toppled in an instant. The next morning, the events of the previous day still weighed heavily on Chris. He had tossed and turned in his bed all night, his mind running wild with thoughts of the strange customer. What was his deal? Why had Chris's usual instincts failed him? This wasn't like him. He had always been able to read people, but that man, he was an enigma. Chris arrived early at the dealership, determined to push aside his doubts and get back to business. He was the manager of one of the most successful luxury dealerships in Los Angeles. His team relied on him. The pressure to perform was always there, and the last thing he needed was to be distracted by an oddball customer. The showroom was quiet when Chris walked in, the usual hum of activity still a few hours away. As he made his way to his office, he passed by the gleaming cars lined up in the showroom. They looked pristine, ready to be sold to the next big spender. He took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and forced himself to focus on the task at hand. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Jake. "You good, boss? Haven't seen you this shaken up in a while." Chris frowned and replied, "Just overthinking some things. I'll be fine. Let's focus on getting some sales today." He hit send and set his phone down, but the message stuck with him. Jake was right. Chris had been on edge lately. The pressure to keep the dealership at the top of its game was starting to feel like a weight that was getting heavier every day. Just as Chris was about to sit down at his desk, the dealership's front door chimed. He looked up, and his heart skipped a beat. There he was again, the man in the hoodie. The one who had thrown him off the day before. This time, the man wasn't alone. He was accompanied by two other individuals, both sharply dressed, in black suits that looked like they cost more than Chris's entire wardrobe combined. The trio walked in with the same quiet confidence that Chris had observed the day before, as if they owned the place. It was impossible to ignore. The man in the hoodie didn't make a beeline for the cars this time. Instead, he headed straight for Chris's office. Chris's heart raced. He had hoped the encounter yesterday had been some kind of fluke. But now, with the man returning, he couldn't help but feel that something much bigger was happening, and he wasn't sure he was ready for it. Before Chris could gather his thoughts, the man knocked softly on his office door. "Mr. Taylor?" he asked, his voice as calm as ever. "Yes." Chris stood up, feeling a mix of frustration and curiosity. "What can I do for you?" The man stepped into the office with his two companions, all three of them standing tall and commanding the room. "We need to talk," the man said, his eyes fixed on Chris, as if he were assessing him. Chris crossed his arms, trying to maintain his cool. "All right, let's talk. What's on your mind?" His tone was businesslike, but inside, his stomach was churning. He knew this wasn't just another casual inquiry about a car. The man gave a small smile, almost as if he knew Chris was on edge. "We're interested in doing business with you," he said, his voice steady and calm. "But we're not looking for just any deal. We want something more exclusive. Something with a bit of flair." Chris raised an eyebrow. "Exclusive?" he repeated. "What do you mean by that?" The man in the hoodie stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "I believe you're in a position to offer something very special. A car purchase is one thing, but we're looking for an experience. A partnership of sorts. Something that goes beyond what you typically offer." Chris leaned back in his chair, trying to remain composed. "I think I'm following you, but I still don't understand what you're asking for. You want a special deal? I've done my fair share of high-end transactions, but if you're asking for something that's off the table, then you've come to the wrong place." The man smiled again, and Chris couldn't help but notice the calm confidence that radiated from him. "Let's just say we're willing to invest in more than just a car," the man continued. "In fact, we're looking to make an investment in your business, your future." Chris's eyebrows furrowed. "My future?" He leaned forward in his chair. Who exactly are you, and what exactly are you offering? For the first time, the man's smile faded just slightly. He didn't answer right away, as if choosing his words carefully. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice low. You've built a successful business here, Mr. Taylor. But success is fragile. We want to ensure that yours continues to grow. In fact, we could help you accelerate that growth. We could help you make this dealership the best in the country. Chris's curiosity was piqued, but at the same time, a sense of unease crept over him. And what's the catch? He asked, his tone more cautious now. Chris sat back, his mind racing. A partnership? An investment? This wasn't the typical sales pitch he was used to hearing. What was this guy really after? Let me be clear, Chris said, his voice firm. I don't make decisions like this lightly. If you want a partnership, you'd better tell me exactly who you are, who you represent, and why I should even consider your offer. The man looked Chris in the eye, unshaken. My name is David Caldwell, he said, his voice smooth. And I'm with the Tesla Group. The room seemed to freeze for a moment. Chris's heart skipped a beat. Tesla. The name hit Chris like a thunderclap, and suddenly, everything changed. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but they didn't add up the way Chris expected. Was this man really from Tesla? The same company that had revolutionized the car industry? David Caldwell was clearly not just a wealthy buyer, he was someone with deep pockets and powerful connections. And now, it seemed, he was making an offer that Chris could never have anticipated. The weight of David Caldwell's words hung heavily in the air, pressing down on Chris like a brick. Tesla Group. The name alone carried so much power, so much weight, that it felt almost surreal. Chris had spent years in the luxury car business, working tirelessly to make a name for himself in a market flooded with competition, but never in his wildest dreams had he imagined that someone from Tesla, one of the most innovative and influential companies in the world, would walk into his dealership. And with such an offer. Chris couldn't mask the shock on his face. Wait, Tesla Group? As in Elon Musk's Tesla? He stammered, barely able to keep his voice steady. David Caldwell's gaze didn't waver. He nodded once, a calm, almost dismissive motion. That's right. We're interested in making you an offer you can't refuse, Mr. Taylor. Chris struggled to maintain his composure. His mind raced, processing everything. This wasn't just another customer looking for a luxury car. This wasn't a casual sales pitch. This was big. Really big. So, let me get this straight, Chris said, standing up from his chair, trying to collect himself. You're telling me that Tesla, one of the most successful companies in the world, wants to partner with me? With my dealership? David smiled faintly. Not just a partnership. We want to invest in you, your dealership, your future. Think bigger, Mr. Taylor. We want to take this dealership to the next level, make it a part of something much larger. We believe there's potential here, potential that you might not even realize yet. Chris could hardly believe his ears. The offer was enticing, but there was so much he still didn't understand. Why me? There are plenty of other dealerships out there. Why choose mine? His voice was laced with both suspicion and curiosity. David glanced at his companions, who had remained silent until now. One of them, a tall man with dark sunglasses, gave a slight nod. David returned his attention to Chris, leaning forward slightly. Your dealership has the right vision, Mr. Taylor. The right leadership. We've been watching you for a while. We've seen the way you've built your reputation. We think you're ready to take the leap. Chris felt a strange mix of pride and unease. This wasn't just about selling a car. This was about something bigger. Much bigger. And what's the catch? He asked, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of questions in his mind. David's eyes gleamed with quiet confidence. There's no catch, at least, not in the way you're thinking. We're not here to take control of your dealership. We're here to help you scale it, to make it part of something revolutionary. We want you to lead this new venture. You'll be in charge, but with our resources and backing. We're offering you an opportunity to be a part of something that could change the automotive world. Chris's mind was spinning. He had spent years building up his dealership, putting in the long hours, facing the tough competition. And now, Tesla, a company that had redefined the car industry, wanted him to join them? This wasn't just any opportunity. It was a chance to reshape his future. But at what cost? How does this work, exactly? Chris asked, still trying to make sense of everything. What do you want from me? What's the deal here? David sat back, folding his hands in front of him. We're offering a minority stake in the dealership. You remain the owner, but with our investment, we'll give you access to Tesla's resources, technology, and marketing power. This isn't just about cars anymore, it's about creating an experience, a lifestyle that goes beyond what any other dealership can offer. Chris absorbed the words, feeling both the excitement and the gravity of what was being proposed. This was a dream for many in the industry, an opportunity to be part of one of the most successful and innovative companies of the modern era. But it also felt like a gamble. A big one. You said, minority stake. What exactly does that mean for me? Chris asked, still unsure. David's eyes darkened slightly, as if he were getting to the heart of the matter. It means that we'll have influence, yes. But you'll still control the day-to-day operations. We want your vision to lead the way, with our guidance and support. However, we expect you to be a part of something bigger, a vision that aligns with the future of the automotive industry. Chris felt the tension in the air. There was a lot on the line here, and the stakes were higher than anything he had ever encountered. He could almost taste the potential for success, but the fear of losing his autonomy gnawed at him. What if this was too good to be true? What if, in accepting the deal, he was giving up more than he realized? David seemed to sense the hesitation. You don't have to make a decision right away. Take some time. But I can tell you this is an opportunity that doesn't come around often. We're serious about what we're offering. Chris nodded slowly, still processing everything. His head was spinning. He needed to think, to figure out whether this opportunity was a dream or a potential nightmare in disguise. David rose from his seat, signaling that the conversation was coming to an end. Take your time, Mr. Taylor. We'll be in touch. As the trio left the office, Chris stood frozen for a moment, unable to move. The weight of the decision ahead of him felt overwhelming. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But it also felt like he was standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure of whether to take the leap or step back. His phone buzzed again, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Jake. Are we still on for drinks tonight? You look like you need to unwind. Chris stared at the message, a mixture of emotions bubbling inside him. Jake had no idea what had just happened, what kind of decision Chris was facing. He couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was going to change everything, whether he was ready for it or not. Chris spent the next few hours pacing back and forth in his office, the weight of David Caldwell's words echoing in his mind. Tesla, an opportunity he had never imagined, let alone been offered. Everything he had worked for was suddenly within reach, but so was the possibility of losing himself in the process. Could he trust the people who had come to him with such a tempting offer? The dealership's phone kept ringing, but Chris wasn't in the mood for small talk or sales pitches. He needed space to think, to process. The room felt smaller with each passing minute. His thoughts spun in a never-ending loop, each idea competing for attention. Was he willing to sacrifice his independence for a partnership that promised unlimited potential? The thought of being a part of something larger, something revolutionary, was enticing. But at the same time, there was a nagging feeling in the back of his mind that this might not be all it seemed. Tesla had its own vision, and that vision didn't always leave room for personal autonomy. Chris's mind kept returning to one simple question: what did he want out of this? What was the point of all the struggle and sacrifice if it didn't lead to something that mattered to him? He didn't want to lose his passion for the dealership, for the cars, for the customer service that had gotten him to this point. Could a deal with Tesla still allow him to keep those things intact? His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from his sister, Rachel. "How's everything going? Got some time later? We should catch up." Rachel had always been a voice of reason in his life, and Chris found himself drawn to the idea of talking things through with her. She'd been with him through thick and thin, and she knew the weight of his decisions better than anyone. Maybe it was time for a heart-to-heart with someone who could help him sort through the chaos of his mind. He texted back, "I'll meet you at our usual spot in an hour. Got something important to talk about." An hour later, Chris found himself sitting across from Rachel in their favorite cafe, a cozy little spot tucked away on a quiet street in downtown Los Angeles. The smell of freshly ground coffee filled the air, and the low murmur of other patrons created a warm, inviting atmosphere. It was a small oasis in the midst of the hectic world Chris had built around him. Rachel looked up from her phone as Chris slid into the seat across from her, his eyes tired and his expression heavy. "You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders," Rachel remarked, her voice laced with concern. "What's going on?" Chris sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "I don't even know where to start. I got an offer today, a big one. From Tesla." Rachel's eyes widened slightly. "Tesla? As in Elon Musk's company?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "What's going on, Chris? What are they offering you?" Chris leaned back in his chair, the weight of the conversation ahead sinking in. "They want to invest in my dealership, partner with me. They see potential in what I've built here, and they think I could be a part of something bigger. Something revolutionary." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a dream come true, right? So why do you look like someone just offered you a snake instead of a golden ticket?" Chris chuckled bitterly. "It feels like it could be a dream, but I'm not sure I want to wake up in someone else's reality. They're offering me resources, technology, and backing, but it comes with strings attached. I wouldn't be calling all the shots anymore. They'd have influence. And that's what worries me." Rachel took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes thoughtful. "So, what exactly are you afraid of? Losing control?" Chris nodded, the words coming out heavier than he expected. "Yeah. I've spent my whole life building this. Every deal, every success, every failure, it's been mine. But now, I'm staring at the possibility of handing that over. And I don't know if I can live with that." Rachel leaned forward, her gaze steady. "I get it. It's a big decision. But have you thought about the other side? What could this deal mean for you? For the dealership?" Chris frowned, his thoughts racing. "It could mean unlimited growth. We're talking about Tesla, think about the cars, the technology, the brand recognition. It would elevate everything. I could make the dealership into something even bigger than it is now." Rachel's eyes softened. "It could also mean you lose what you love about it. Your passion for this place, for the cars. You've always been about creating a personalized experience for your customers. If you sign up with them, do you think they'll allow you to keep that vision intact?" Chris stared down at his coffee cup, lost in thought. Rachel's words cut deeper than he expected. Could he really keep the soul of his dealership while playing by Tesla's rules? Or would he be swallowed up by the machine that had revolutionized the world? "I don't know," Chris muttered. "I've been working so hard to make this dealership a place that people can trust. But if I partner with Tesla, would it just become another chain? Another cog in a giant, faceless corporation?" Rachel smiled gently. "You're not a cog, Chris. You've never been one. But maybe it's not about whether you lose yourself in the deal. Maybe it's about how you adapt. If you're willing to take on that partnership, maybe you can shape it in a way that still feels true to who you are. Chris looked up at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Could he find a balance? Could he merge his passion with the power of Tesla's resources and still come out on top? Maybe, he said slowly, the idea beginning to take root. But it's going to take some careful thought. I don't want to rush into something just because it sounds good on paper. Rachel nodded, her eyes full of understanding. Take your time. Just remember that you're not alone in this. Whatever decision you make, I'm here for you. Chris smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. For the first time that day, he felt like he could breathe again. He didn't have to make the decision right now. He had time. And he had people who cared about him. But one thing was certain, the path ahead wasn't going to be easy. It was going to be full of difficult choices, and the future would depend on the steps he took today. The next few days were a blur for Chris. Every morning he woke up to the same question: what was he going to do? He had barely been able to focus on anything else since that meeting with David Caldwell and the Tesla team. His phone buzzed constantly with calls, emails, and messages about his dealership, but all Chris could think about was the deal hanging over him like a storm cloud. Despite the confusion, he couldn't deny the allure of what Tesla was offering. He had always been someone who thrived on ambition, constantly pushing for bigger and better things. The idea of taking his dealership to the next level with the power of Tesla behind him was intoxicating. But at the same time, the thought of losing his independence, losing control over what he had worked so hard to build, was suffocating. He spent hours going over the numbers, trying to calculate the potential gains, but the figures seemed to blur together. The numbers didn't matter as much as the bigger picture, the impact this decision would have on his identity, his legacy. Chris couldn't help but think back to the very beginning, when he opened his first dealership. The excitement, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices he made to get to where he was now. It was all about passion for the cars, for the customers, for the experience. Could he still have that passion if he signed a deal with Tesla? That thought haunted him as he drove to work one morning. The usual traffic snarls seemed irrelevant as his mind wandered. His eyes glanced at the sleek cars on the road, many of which were Tesla models. What if I could offer something bigger than just luxury cars? What if I could offer the future? The thought made his heart race, but it was quickly followed by doubt. What if I'm not ready for this? He had spent his whole career building a brand that was rooted in a personal, hands-on experience. Could he merge that with the corporate machinery of Tesla without losing what made his dealership special? As Chris arrived at the dealership, his assistant, Jenna, was waiting for him in the lobby with a clipboard in hand. Morning, Chris. You've got a meeting with Victor Hughes in an hour. Also, David Caldwell's team has been trying to reach you again. They're eager to know your thoughts, she said, giving him a concerned look. You okay? Chris forced a smile. Yeah, just thinking. Thanks, Jenna. Jenna hesitated for a moment. I know this is a big decision, but don't forget what you've built here. You've got people who care about this place. We all do. Her words stuck with him, even as he headed toward the meeting room to meet Victor Hughes, the manufacturer's representative for the luxury car brands that Chris sold. They discussed new inventory and sales projections, but Chris's mind wasn't on the conversation. He nodded absent-mindedly, giving quick responses, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the Tesla deal. After the meeting, Chris sat in his office, staring out the window. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the lot. The cars looked beautiful, their sleek lines gleaming under the light. But no matter how perfect they seemed, Chris couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. His phone buzzed again, snapping him out of his reverie. It was a text from Rachel. How are you doing with the Tesla thing? Have you made up your mind yet? Chris sighed and replied, still thinking. It's a lot to take in. Rachel's response was immediate, I get that. But don't lose sight of why you started this in the first place. Whatever you decide, just make sure it feels right for you. He stared at the message for a while, the words sinking in. Rachel was right. He couldn't forget why he had opened the dealership in the first place. He had always dreamed of creating a place where people could find more than just a car, they could find a connection, a level of service that made them feel like family. The thought made him realize something: it wasn't just about cars. It was about creating experiences. It was about forging connections. Could Tesla help him do that, or would it swallow everything he had worked for? As the night grew darker, Chris found himself standing in the middle of his showroom, surrounded by the cars that had been with him through every high and low. The floor was quiet, the lights above casting long shadows across the polished surfaces. His thoughts were interrupted when his phone rang. It was a call from David Caldwell. "Mr. Taylor, I just wanted to check in and see where you stand. We've been very impressed with you, and I think this could be a great partnership." David's voice was smooth, persuasive. "I understand you have reservations, but let me assure you, this is a chance for you to not just grow your business, but to become a part of something truly groundbreaking." Chris's grip on the phone tightened. "I know, David. It's just, I don't want to lose myself in all of this. I've worked so hard to make this dealership what it is today." David was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone was softer. "I get it, Chris. But what you're doing here is incredible, and Tesla has the resources to help you elevate it even further. We want to help you make that leap, not take over. Your vision is key to this partnership. Think of it as an opportunity to share that vision with a much wider audience." Chris let the silence hang between them, weighing the words. Could he really make this work? Could he stay true to his vision while also embracing the support and resources Tesla offered? "I'll think about it, David," Chris said, finally breaking the silence. "But I need more time. I can't rush into something like this." David's voice was calm, understanding. "Take all the time you need. We're here when you're ready to talk." As Chris hung up, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. He wasn't ready to make a decision yet, and that was okay. He needed more time to reflect, to figure out what he truly wanted. But one thing was certain: he was at a crossroads, and the next step would define the rest of his career, and maybe even his life. He took a deep breath, looking out at the rows of cars once more. His future was uncertain, but for the first time in days, he felt a sense of clarity. He wasn't alone in this decision. He had a team behind him, a family that cared about his success. And most importantly, he had time to figure out which path was the right one. The days seemed to stretch on forever. Chris had thought that time would help him make sense of everything, but instead, it only added to the pressure. Every conversation, every email, every moment spent at the dealership now felt tangled with the question of whether or not he should accept Tesla's offer. The more he thought about it, the more confused he became. Each time he walked through the showroom, surrounded by the shiny cars he had spent years building his reputation around, a voice in his head would ask, "Is this enough? Was it enough to just keep running the dealership as it was, staying small, independent, and fiercely loyal to his customers? Or was it time to evolve, to push past his comfort zone, and allow a bigger vision to take shape?" The following Friday, Chris sat down with his financial advisor, Mark, who had been with him since the early days of the dealership. Mark was a no-nonsense guy, known for his clear-cut advice and no sugarcoating when it came to business matters. It was just the kind of perspective Chris needed right now. "So, you've been mulling over Tesla's offer," Mark said, flipping through a stack of documents in front of him. "What's the holdup? This could be the opportunity of a lifetime." Chris ran a hand through his hair. "It's not that simple. The deal looks amazing on paper. The resources, the brand recognition, the tech, everything Tesla offers could take my business to levels I never imagined. But I keep coming back to this: what happens to the soul of this place? What happens to my vision?" Mark leaned forward, folding his arms across his chest. "Listen, Chris, I get it. This is your baby, your vision. You've worked hard to build something unique. But let's be real, there's only so much you can do on your own. With Tesla backing you, you'll be able to scale in ways you haven't even thought of. You won't lose your passion for the business. You'll just have the means to grow it. Chris shook his head. It's not just about growing it, Mark. It's about keeping the heart of it. The reason people come to me is because they trust me. They know I'm not just selling cars, I'm selling an experience. That's what makes my dealership stand out. Mark smiled, as if this was something he'd been expecting. Chris, you're still the one in charge. A partnership doesn't mean you give up your vision. Tesla's not trying to change that. They want to help you reach more people, give you the tools you need to offer that experience to a broader audience. Don't think of it as selling out. Think of it as evolving. Chris was quiet for a moment, processing Mark's words. There was something about hearing it like that that felt different. Evolving. It made the idea of change feel less like a threat and more like an opportunity. But what if I lose control? Chris asked. What if they start calling the shots? What if I don't get to make the decisions that matter? Mark shrugged. That's a risk with any partnership. But you're no rookie, Chris. You've got a strong hand in this deal, and you know how to negotiate. You don't have to give up control entirely. The question is, how much are you willing to let go of to make your dream bigger? Chris thought about that. The weight of it all felt heavier than ever. But at the same time, there was a part of him that couldn't ignore the potential. Maybe it was time to take that leap. Maybe the dream he had built could grow into something even greater, something that would outlive him. Okay, Chris said, the decision settling in his mind. I'm going to meet with them again. But I want to be clear on a few things. I'm not giving up my vision. I'm not going to let Tesla turn this into something I don't recognize. I'll work with them, but I need to have a say in the direction we go. Mark nodded, his expression approving. That's the spirit. You've got this, Chris. You know what you're doing. Now, it's just a matter of making sure you're protected and that you get the right deal for yourself and your dealership. Chris stood up, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in days. He wasn't entirely sure about the future, but one thing was clear, he wasn't going to let fear or uncertainty make the decision for him. He would take the reins, but he would do it on his own terms. As Chris walked out of the office, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Rachel. Just checking in, how's the decision going? Don't forget, you've got a family that believes in you. Chris smiled, the weight on his shoulders lifting slightly. He had always relied on Rachel for support, and now, as he was about to make one of the biggest decisions of his life, her words meant more than ever. I can do this, he thought. I just have to stay true to who I am. Later that day, Chris called David Caldwell and set up another meeting. He wasn't ready to sign anything just yet, but he wanted to get the conversation back on track. It was time to talk specifics, time to understand exactly what Tesla was offering and, more importantly, what he could ask for in return. The following week, Chris found himself walking into the same sleek conference room where he'd first met David Caldwell. The room, with its polished floors and minimalist design, seemed to reflect the very essence of Tesla, clean, efficient, futuristic. But today, it felt more like a battleground. He wasn't just there to talk about a deal. He was there to protect what he had worked so hard to build. David Caldwell was already sitting at the table, flipping through a folder with a stack of documents in front of him. He looked up as Chris entered, offering a warm smile. Chris, glad to see you again. How's everything going? Chris took a deep breath before answering. Everything's good, David. I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation. And I've decided I'm ready to move forward. But I need to make sure we're on the same page. David's eyes gleamed. I'm glad to hear that, Chris. We're excited about the possibility of working with you. Let's dive into the specifics. What's on your mind? Chris sat down across from David, his hands resting on the table. He wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. This time, he was going to ask the hard questions, set the boundaries, and make sure Tesla understood what he needed from them. I've thought a lot about how Tesla can help my dealership grow, Chris began. But I need to be clear, I'm not willing to give up control over how things are run. I've built this place from the ground up, and I won't let it become just another showroom. It's about the experience, the relationships, the service. Tesla can't lose sight of that. David nodded, taking notes as Chris spoke. Absolutely, Chris. We understand that. Our goal is to help you scale while maintaining the essence of what you've already created. We want to enhance the experience for your customers, not change it. We want to be partners, not take over. Chris leaned forward. Good. Because the way I see it, this partnership can't just be about you getting more exposure. It's about mutual benefit. I need more flexibility with inventory, more say in how the customer experience unfolds, and, most importantly, I need to maintain my team. My employees, my customers, they're my family. If we're going to move forward, I need to know that Tesla values that. David paused for a moment, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. I understand, Chris. And I appreciate your honesty. Let's break down some of the specifics. We're prepared to offer you a higher allocation of vehicles, more training for your team, and, of course, a larger marketing budget. But we also need you to integrate more of Tesla's branding into the dealership. The Tesla experience has a specific look and feel that we want to be consistent across all our locations. Chris listened closely, weighing the offer. More inventory was good. Training for his team was even better. But the Tesla branding? That was where he started to feel the pressure. He had spent years cultivating a personal, boutique atmosphere. Could he really merge that with Tesla's sleek, modern, and sometimes impersonal aesthetic? What about the showroom layout? Chris asked, his brow furrowing. I'm not interested in turning my dealership into a Tesla clone. I want it to still feel like a place where people come to connect, not just to buy a car. David smiled, his demeanor calm but firm. We're not looking to replace your style, Chris. We're offering you support, not control. You can maintain your unique vibe. But there will need to be certain design elements that reflect Tesla's brand. It's part of the overall experience. We can work with you to find a balance that makes sense. Chris took a deep breath, trying to process the offer. This was the moment. This was where the rubber met the road. The terms were starting to shape up, but there was still one thing Chris needed to hear. What about the employees? Chris asked, his voice more cautious now. I want to make sure they're not just pushed aside in this process. Tesla's got a reputation for being fast-paced. My team's been with me for years, and they're the reason my customers keep coming back. David's expression softened, and he nodded. I completely understand. We want your team to be an integral part of this. The last thing we want is for them to feel like they're being replaced. We're prepared to offer additional benefits and incentives to your employees. We'll provide the training they need to work with Tesla's technology, and we'll make sure they're compensated fairly. In return, we'll be looking for your top people to take on leadership roles in the transition. Chris felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The concern about his employees was one of the most important factors in his decision-making. If Tesla was willing to support his team, that was a huge step in the right direction. Okay, Chris said, nodding slowly. I'm listening. But there's one more thing. David raised an eyebrow. What's that? I need a guarantee, Chris said, his voice steady. A guarantee that I can walk away if things don't go as planned. I need the option to step back and take my dealership back to its roots if the partnership isn't working. I don't want to be locked in forever if it's not the right fit. David didn't hesitate. "We can do that, Chris. We'll put in a clause that allows you to exit the agreement if things aren't going the way you expect. It's a fair request." Chris exhaled, feeling a sense of relief. This wasn't just a deal to grow his business. This was a partnership that gave him room to make sure his vision remained intact. With the right protections in place, he could move forward without the fear of losing what mattered most to him. "All right, David," Chris said, his tone decisive. "I think we can make this work. Let's move forward with the deal." David's smile widened. "I'm glad to hear that, Chris. I think this is going to be the beginning of something incredible. We're going to do great things together." As Chris walked out of the conference room, a sense of accomplishment washed over him. It wasn't the end of the journey, but it was a step in the right direction. He had managed to preserve his dealership's identity while embracing the opportunity to expand. Now, the real work was about to begin. After the meeting with David, Chris felt a sense of relief, but he knew the hardest part was still ahead. Signing the deal was one thing, but integrating Tesla's vision into his dealership without losing what made it unique was going to take work. He needed to prepare himself, and his team, for the change that was coming. The following days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and endless discussions about logistics. Tesla's representatives were eager to get the ball rolling, but Chris found himself pacing back and forth, mentally preparing for the cultural shift he was about to experience. He had always prided himself on running a tight-knit, personalized operation. His employees weren't just workers, they were family. The thought of introducing a big corporate brand into their close community felt daunting. One evening, as Chris sat in his office surrounded by paperwork, Rachel called. She could tell something was weighing on him. "How's everything going with Tesla?" she asked, her voice soothing over the phone. Chris sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's going. I guess. The deal's almost set, but I can't shake the feeling that things are going to change a lot around here. I mean, the cars are one thing, but the whole culture of the dealership. That's what worries me. I don't know how to balance the way we've always done things with what Tesla wants." Rachel was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking it over. "I get it. Change is never easy. But you've always been adaptable, Chris. You've survived this long because you've been willing to push the boundaries. The key is making sure your team feels involved in the process. They're going to need to understand the why behind it all." Chris nodded, even though Rachel couldn't see him. "That's what I'm afraid of. I don't want them to think this is some corporate takeover. I want them to feel like this is still our business, just bigger, more impactful." "You'll make it work," Rachel said confidently. "Just keep being the leader you've always been. They'll follow your example. And hey, you've got a lot of good people around you. It's not just about the cars, it's about the relationships. As long as you're clear about your values, I'm sure they'll get it." Chris chuckled softly. "I hope so. Thanks, Rachel. I needed to hear that." The conversation lifted his spirits, but he still had a long road ahead. The next day, he called an all-staff meeting. The dealership had been buzzing with rumors about the Tesla deal, and Chris knew it was time to address everyone openly. He didn't want anyone to feel left in the dark. The morning of the meeting, the employees gathered in the main showroom. Chris stood at the front, his hands clasped in front of him. The energy in the room was tense, there were whispers, uncertain glances. It was clear that everyone was curious but apprehensive about what the future held. "All right, everyone," Chris began, his voice steady but warm. "I know there's been a lot of talk about the Tesla partnership, and I want to clear the air about what this means for us. First off, I want to say this isn't a change we're making because we have to. We're doing it because we want to continue growing and evolving. We want to give you all the opportunity to be part of something bigger." He paused, scanning the room. "But I need to make something clear. This is our dealership. The heart and soul of what we've built won't change. Yes, we're going to have new cars, new technology, and new branding. But at the end of the day, we're still going to offer the same level of service, the same commitment to our customers. Tesla's here to help us take it to the next level, not take it over. The room was silent for a moment, and Chris could feel the weight of the uncertainty in the air. Then, one of the sales managers, Todd, spoke up. Chris, I get that you're trying to keep things the same, but honestly, I'm worried. Tesla's a big company. They're all about efficiency, numbers, and technology. What happens if they start telling us how to run things? What if they want us to change the way we've been doing things for years? Chris nodded. He had expected this kind of question. I understand your concern, Todd. And I'm not going to pretend it's going to be easy. There will be adjustments. But here's the thing, I'm still the one calling the shots here. I'm not going to let Tesla turn this place into something unrecognizable. We're going to work together to find the right balance. Another employee, Sarah, spoke up from the back of the room. But what about our roles? Are we going to lose our jobs to Tesla employees? What if the new technology means we have to change the way we do things? Chris smiled, grateful for the honesty. I hear you, Sarah. And I want to assure you all that no one is losing their job. In fact, we're looking at adding more positions to handle the new tech. Tesla's going to help us with training, but you are still the ones who know this business inside and out. You're the ones who will help us deliver the Tesla experience in a way that fits with what we've already built here. The tension in the room seemed to dissipate slightly, though there was still an undercurrent of uncertainty. Chris knew it wasn't going to be easy to win everyone over, but he was determined to lead them through this. We're going to face some challenges, Chris continued. There's no doubt about that. But we're also going to have the opportunity to do something great together. So let's keep the conversation open. If you have concerns, come to me. We'll work through it as a team. The meeting ended with a mixture of cautious optimism and lingering doubt, but Chris felt a small victory. He had planted the seeds of trust, and now it was up to him to nurture them. That afternoon, Chris spent time with his leadership team, outlining the next steps for the transition. They had to start preparing for the influx of Tesla inventory, design changes to the showroom, and the integration of new systems. He also reached out to his network of dealership owners to get a sense of how they had navigated similar partnerships. The days blurred together as Chris balanced the logistical aspects of the transition with the emotional labor of keeping his team motivated. The challenge was immense, but it was also an opportunity, one that could define his legacy. As the sun began to set over the dealership, Chris stood outside, looking at the rows of cars lined up under the dimming sky. There was a sense of calm that washed over him. The future was uncertain, but it was in his hands. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The first signs of change hit the dealership like a storm. New Tesla cars began arriving on the lot, gleaming under the harsh lights of the showroom, their cutting-edge technology standing in stark contrast to the familiar, more traditional vehicles Chris's team had been selling for years. It wasn't just the cars that were different, everything was shifting. From the way they handled paperwork to the new Tesla branding plastered on the walls, nothing felt the same. Chris spent his mornings at the dealership, overseeing the unboxing and preparation of the Tesla vehicles, and his afternoons in endless meetings with Tesla's corporate team. The new inventory was impressive, but the influx of tech-driven decisions was creating tension. His employees, who had always prided themselves on their personalized service, now found themselves adapting to a system where everything was monitored, measured, and, at times, dictated by Tesla's vision. They were trying to figure out how to maintain their personal touch while navigating the efficiency-driven culture Tesla demanded. One afternoon, Chris sat in his office, staring at the Tesla dealership guidelines on his desk. He had just received an email from David Caldwell about the required software systems that all Tesla dealerships were required to implement. The systems would streamline everything, from inventory management to customer communications. But Chris wasn't sure if it would streamline his team's connections with their customers. Rachel knocked and entered, her presence always a comforting one amidst the chaos. "Got a minute?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. Chris looked up and smiled, grateful for her calm demeanor. "Of course. Just the person I need right now." Rachel closed the door and walked over to the desk. "You look stressed." Chris rubbed his temples. "I'm just trying to figure out how we're supposed to keep our dealership's culture intact while also running this like a Tesla operation. It's not just about selling cars anymore. Everything's about data, efficiency, and speed." "I get it, but it's like we've lost our human touch." Rachel sat down in the chair opposite him. "That's the thing about big companies like Tesla, they don't always understand the value of the personal connections. But I think that's where you come in, Chris. You've always been the bridge between your team and the customers. You need to keep that human element alive in the face of all this tech." Chris nodded thoughtfully, feeling the weight of her words. "Yeah, but how? The pressure to meet Tesla's standards is enormous. We've already had some friction with the sales team over the new tracking systems they've been forced to use. They feel like they're being watched constantly." Rachel leaned forward. "It's about showing them that you're still on their side. The new systems are here to make their lives easier in the long run. They just don't see it yet. Maybe you could bring in some training sessions where you emphasize how these systems can actually help them serve customers better, instead of just treating it as something they have to do." Chris's mind raced. "That's a good idea. We need to make them see the bigger picture. I can't afford to have morale drop right now, not with everything on the line." Rachel gave him a reassuring smile. "Exactly. And remember, you're not alone in this. Tesla's got a lot of resources, and they've been through this transition with other dealerships. They know what works and what doesn't. Lean on them for guidance." Chris stood up from his desk and walked over to the window, looking out at the Tesla vehicles lined up on the lot. For a moment, he wondered if he had made the right decision. The stakes had never been higher, and the pressure was mounting. But he couldn't turn back now. That evening, Chris called a meeting with his sales team. The room was filled with the usual energy, but today, there was an undercurrent of unease. It was clear that the integration of Tesla's systems had rattled some of his employees. As they sat down, Chris looked around the room, trying to gauge their mood. He knew he had to address the elephant in the room. "Listen," Chris began, his voice firm but understanding. "I know this transition has been tough for all of you. I won't pretend that it hasn't been a challenge. But I need you to understand something. The reason we're doing this is because I believe in you. I believe in this team, and I believe we can make this work." He paused, watching the room for reactions. Some employees nodded, others looked skeptical. Chris didn't back down. "I get it. The new systems, the tracking, the expectations, it's a lot. But I promise you, this is an opportunity to grow. The tools we're implementing will make us more efficient, allow us to serve our customers faster, and give us the ability to offer a Tesla experience that's personal and real." A few people exchanged glances, and one of the salespeople, Mark, spoke up. "But Chris, the new system is all about metrics. We're being told to hit certain numbers, track every move we make. It's like we're being treated like robots, not salespeople." Chris nodded, acknowledging his concerns. "I hear you, Mark. But let's remember that these tools are only as good as the people using them. The heart of this business is the relationships we build with our customers. That's what makes us different. The technology is here to help us, not replace the personal touch. We can use these systems to do our jobs better and faster without losing that human connection." The room was quiet for a moment as everyone absorbed his words. Slowly, some of the tension began to fade, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Chris knew it wasn't going to be a quick fix, but he could see the spark of hope returning to their eyes. "We're in this together," Chris said, his voice resolute. "We're not just selling cars. We're offering an experience. And we're going to do it our way. Tesla can give us the tools, but it's up to us to make it real." After the meeting, Chris spent the rest of the evening in the showroom, thinking about the future. He had no illusions that the transition would be easy. The next few months would be a series of challenges, some expected and others unforeseen. But as he stood there, watching his team go about their work, he felt a sense of confidence. They could handle it. Together, they would adapt, and they would thrive. As weeks passed, Chris began to see both the benefits and the challenges that came with being a Tesla dealership. The new systems were running smoothly, and customers were excited about the Tesla cars on the lot. The dealership's tech-savvy employees were quickly getting the hang of the new tools, but others, especially the more experienced staff, were struggling to adjust. Chris could sense the growing divide between those who embraced the change and those who were resistant to it. One afternoon, Chris was in the service bay, inspecting a few new Tesla models when his service manager, Greg, approached him with a concerned look on his face. "Chris, we've got a problem," Greg said quietly, as if hesitant to speak. Chris turned to him, sensing the seriousness in Greg's tone. "What's going on?" Greg glanced around to make sure no one was listening before he leaned in. "I've been hearing some things. A few of the tech guys are getting pretty frustrated with the way things are running. Some of them feel like they're being pushed too hard, and they don't like how Tesla's micromanaging everything. It's starting to affect morale, and I think it could get worse if we don't address it soon." Chris sighed, running a hand through his hair. This was exactly what he had feared. The tension between the old way of doing things and the new, data-driven world of Tesla was causing friction. The last thing he wanted was for the dealership to fall apart under the pressure of the transition. "I'll talk to them," Chris said firmly. "Thanks for letting me know, Greg. We can't afford to let this fester. We're in this together, and we need to make sure everyone feels supported." Later that day, Chris gathered his leadership team for an emergency meeting. As the team filed into the conference room, the atmosphere was tense. Chris could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "I've been hearing that some of our employees are feeling the strain of the changes we've made," Chris began, looking each person in the eye. "I know the transition hasn't been easy, and I can't promise there won't be bumps along the way. But I need you all to understand that this dealership is more than just a business. It's a family. And if anyone feels left behind or unsupported, we need to address it immediately." Todd, the sales manager, spoke up first. "Chris, I think we've got a split in the team. Some people are fully on board with Tesla, but others are struggling. They feel like their skills are being disregarded, like the tech is taking over. We've got to make sure that everyone feels like they're still valued here, or this whole thing could backfire." Chris nodded, processing what Todd said. "I hear you. It's clear that we need to be more proactive about supporting everyone through this. The technology is a tool, not a replacement for our people. I'm going to talk to the team tomorrow and make sure they know that." Rachel, always insightful, added, "Chris, you also need to make sure that you're leading by example. They need to see that you believe in this vision. If they see you uncertain or hesitant, that could make them doubt the whole transition. You need to show them that you're in this 100%. Chris took a deep breath. Rachel was right. If he faltered now, so would his team. He had to keep pushing forward, even when things were difficult. The next morning, Chris called another meeting with the entire staff. This time, he knew he had to get real with them. The stakes were too high for any sugarcoating. The room was filled with anxious faces as Chris stepped up to the front, his expression serious. "I want to address something that's been on my mind. I know that some of you are struggling with the changes we've made. And I get it. This isn't easy. We're all used to doing things a certain way, and now we're being asked to adapt to a whole new system." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But I need you to understand this, we are a team. Tesla is not here to replace us. They're here to help us grow. And if you feel overwhelmed or confused, it's my job to help you through it. No one gets left behind. There was a slight shift in the room, as if his words had landed. People were listening, at least. But Chris knew that words alone wouldn't fix everything. He needed to prove that he meant what he said. I've heard your concerns about the technology, the systems, the micromanagement. I've heard it all. And I'm going to make sure that we don't lose sight of what made this dealership special in the first place. Our customers come to us because they trust us. They know that we're not just selling cars, we're providing a service, building relationships. That's what we're going to keep doing. He looked at each person in the room, his voice steady. And if you need help learning the new systems, we'll get you the training you need. If you have concerns about how things are being run, come to me. I'll listen. This is not just Tesla's dealership, it's ours. There was a long silence after Chris finished speaking. Slowly, hands began to rise. First, it was Mark, who had voiced his concerns earlier about the systems. I appreciate you saying that, Chris. It's good to hear you're on our side. Another employee, Maria, chimed in. Yeah, we just need to feel like we're part of the process. Like we're not just being told what to do. Chris nodded, a sense of pride swelling inside him. He knew that his team wasn't out of the woods yet, but this was a good step forward. They were starting to believe in the vision again. And he was starting to believe in them. As the meeting wrapped up, Chris felt a renewed sense of hope. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't going to give up on this dealership, or on the people who had helped him build it from the ground up. He wasn't just managing cars, he was managing people's lives, and that responsibility weighed heavily on his shoulders. That evening, after a long day of meetings and training sessions, Chris stood in the middle of the showroom, looking at the Tesla cars on the lot. They were a symbol of the future, of progress, and of the challenges that lay ahead. But they were also a reminder of what he had always known, change wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And as long as he had his team by his side, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. As the weeks continued to roll by, Chris's dealership settled into a new rhythm, albeit a tense one. The day-to-day operations, while improving, still felt like they were operating under constant scrutiny. Tesla's presence loomed large, from the demanding corporate guidelines to the unyielding sales targets that had begun to take on an almost unbearable weight. One morning, Chris walked into his office to find a stern email from David Caldwell. Tesla's corporate team had been reviewing the dealership's performance metrics, and there were concerns. The numbers weren't up to Tesla's expectations, specifically in the areas of customer engagement and sales conversion rates. They wanted immediate improvements, or there would be consequences. Chris felt a pang of frustration. They'd only been a Tesla dealership for a few months. How could they be expected to meet these high expectations so quickly? But he knew better than to vent to his team, they needed his confidence and direction now more than ever. He called an emergency leadership meeting, gathering Rachel, Greg, Todd, and the rest of his team in the conference room. The pressure was mounting, and Chris knew he had to stay calm to keep the team focused. I just got an email from David Caldwell, Chris began, his tone serious. Tesla's not happy with our numbers. They want results, and they want them fast. The room fell silent, and for a moment, Chris could feel the tension building. He wasn't the only one who had felt the strain of the last few weeks. The sales numbers were tough to meet, and the pressure was starting to take its toll on the team. Greg was the first to speak up. Chris, I don't know how much more we can push. We've been doing everything by the book. It's not like we're not trying, but these targets are unreal. I know, Chris replied, his voice low but resolute. But we don't have a choice. We need to show Tesla that we're capable of handling this transition. I'm going to need all of you to dig deep and push through this next phase. I won't let this dealership fail. Rachel, always the voice of reason, spoke up next. Chris, we've got to remember to keep our people in the loop. We can't just focus on numbers, we need to make sure they're staying motivated and feel supported. If they start to lose faith, it'll affect everything. Chris nodded, grateful for Rachel's calm perspective. Right. We'll do everything we can to keep them engaged. But we need to make sure that everyone knows how critical these next few weeks are. We're on the clock. Todd, ever the realist, leaned forward. So what's the game plan, Chris? What do we need to change to meet these targets? Chris thought for a moment before answering. I think we need to focus on the customer experience more than ever. Tesla's brand is built on innovation and high standards, and we need to mirror that in our service. I want every person who walks through that door to feel like they're getting a Tesla experience, not just a car, but a whole new level of service. We can do that, Todd said with a nod. It'll require all hands on deck, but it's doable. We need to amp up our customer outreach, maybe even get a few more personal touches in the sales process. Exactly, Chris said, feeling a surge of determination. We're not just selling cars. We're selling the future. Let's start focusing on the value Tesla brings to people's lives. Once we shift that mindset, the sales will follow. Greg spoke up again, concern still evident on his face. But what about the tech side? We've been pushing these systems hard, but some of the guys are getting fed up with it. If we keep pushing them without support, we'll lose some of our best employees. Chris nodded thoughtfully. I hear you, Greg. Let's roll out some additional training sessions, specifically for those who are struggling with the systems. We need to make sure they feel comfortable and confident with the technology. And let's check in with them more regularly to see how they're doing. Sounds good, Greg agreed, but he still looked concerned. But what happens if we don't hit those targets? Chris hesitated. He had thought about that very question all night. If we don't meet those numbers, we could be in danger of losing our status as a Tesla dealership. We can't afford that. Rachel leaned forward. Chris, we've been through tough times before. I believe we can turn this around. But we need to stay focused on the big picture. Let's not lose sight of what makes us different. People come to us because they trust us. Chris nodded, feeling the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. He wasn't just a manager anymore, he was the one who was supposed to steer the ship through the storm. The next few days were a blur of strategy meetings, impromptu coaching sessions, and reworking the dealership's approach to customer service. Chris could see the determination in his team's eyes, but he could also see the strain. The pressure was beginning to crack some of the more seasoned employees, and Chris knew he had to find a way to lift their spirits without ignoring the gravity of the situation. One night, as Chris was working late in his office, he received a call from David Caldwell. The tone in David's voice was businesslike, but Chris could sense the underlying frustration. Chris, we're looking at your numbers again. There's been little improvement. If we don't see significant progress soon, we may have to reassess your dealership's future with Tesla. Chris's heart raced. He could feel the walls closing in on him. He had worked so hard to get to this point. Was it all slipping away? David, I understand the concerns. We're doing everything we can, and I believe we'll start seeing the results soon. I'm committed to making this work. David's voice softened, but only slightly. I hope so, Chris. But you need to understand, Tesla isn't going to wait forever. The next few weeks will tell us everything. The call ended, and Chris sat back in his chair, staring at the glowing screen in front of him. Everything was on the line. He had to find a way to turn things around, not just for himself, but for his team, for his customers, and for the future of the dealership. The pressure was suffocating. Chris had barely slept the past few nights, his mind constantly running through numbers, strategies, and the consequences of failure. Every phone call, every email, every conversation seemed to lead back to one thing, Tesla's expectations. But despite the constant stress, Chris had a glimmer of hope. There was one thing he knew for certain: his team was worth fighting for. They were resilient, capable, and determined. The change wasn't easy, but if anyone could turn things around, it was them. Chris sat in his office one morning, staring at the email from David Caldwell once again. The subject line read, "Urgent, Final Evaluation." He exhaled slowly, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He had already prepared his response, but somehow, the weight of the situation made it hard to press send. He needed to show confidence, not only to David, but to himself and his team. Before he could hit send, Rachel knocked and entered the office. "Hey, got a minute?" she asked, her voice calm, but there was a spark of energy in her eyes. "Of course, Rachel, come on in," Chris replied, leaning back in his chair. His mind had been so preoccupied with the looming deadline that he hadn't even realized how much he needed a conversation with her. Rachel took a seat across from him and let out a breath. "I know things are rough right now, Chris, but I think we're on the verge of something big." Chris raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well, I was thinking about what we've been doing wrong. And I realized that we've been focusing a lot on the tech and the systems, trying to hit the numbers as quickly as possible. But we haven't been telling our story. We haven't been reminding people why they love Tesla in the first place, why they trust us." Chris leaned forward, intrigued. "What are you getting at?" Rachel smiled slightly. "We're not just selling cars. We're selling a lifestyle, a vision for the future. Tesla isn't just about a car, it's about sustainability, innovation, and the environment. We've got to get back to basics. We need to connect with our customers on a deeper level, not just on sales, but on their values. If we can make them feel like they're part of something bigger, they'll want to be a part of this." Chris's heart quickened. "That's it. We've been too focused on the numbers and not enough on the narrative. I think we've been trying to make Tesla just another car brand. But it's not. It's a movement." Rachel nodded. "Exactly. So, I've been brainstorming a few ideas. What if we did an event? A Tesla showcase, but not just any event. We could invite local influencers, environmental groups, and, most importantly, our customers. It'll be a celebration of everything Tesla stands for. We'll give people the opportunity to see what the brand really represents and why they should care." Chris couldn't help but grin. It was the kind of bold idea he had been looking for. An event like this could create buzz, attract attention, and remind people why they wanted to be a part of the Tesla experience. "Let's do it," Chris said, feeling a surge of excitement. "Let's make it happen. We need to show everyone what Tesla is about and remind them why we're here." Rachel's face lit up. "I knew you'd be on board. I'll get started on the details right away." As Rachel left his office, Chris couldn't help but feel a sense of optimism returning. He was ready to take action, to fight for his dealership, and to remind everyone of the bigger picture. It wasn't just about hitting targets, it was about creating a lasting connection with their community, with their customers, and with Tesla's vision. The event came together quickly. Chris and Rachel worked tirelessly over the next few days, pulling together a team of dedicated employees to help with planning. They contacted local eco-friendly brands, green energy advocates, and Tesla enthusiasts, inviting them to join the event and celebrate the brand's core values. The day of the event arrived, and the dealership was buzzing with activity. The lot was filled with Tesla vehicles, shiny, sleek, and ready to be explored by the excited crowd that had gathered. The atmosphere was electric, with live music, eco-friendly food trucks, and interactive displays showcasing the latest Tesla innovations. Chris stood at the entrance, greeting guests and soaking in the energy of the event. He watched as people, young and old, gathered around the cars, asking questions, taking photos, and discussing the future of electric vehicles. There was an undeniable sense of excitement in the air, and Chris could see that his team's hard work was paying off. At one point, a local journalist approached him, camera in hand. "Chris, this event is incredible. What inspired you to put something like this together? Chris smiled, his confidence growing with each word. It's simple, really. Tesla represents the future, innovation, sustainability, and progress. And I wanted to make sure that our community could see that. It's not just about selling cars, it's about being part of something bigger than ourselves. We want to help lead that change. The journalist nodded, impressed. It's definitely working. People are excited, and they're talking about Tesla in a way they haven't before. This is the kind of event that brings people together. As the day went on, more and more people arrived, drawn in by the energy of the event. Chris saw firsthand how powerful a sense of community could be. Customers weren't just interested in the cars, they were interested in the message Tesla was sending, the vision it was shaping. The event was a success, and Chris felt a renewed sense of pride in his team. That evening, as the event wound down, Chris sat in his office, reflecting on the day. He'd received dozens of positive comments, not only from customers but from the community at large. People were talking about Tesla in a way that hadn't happened before, and he knew that this was only the beginning. The next morning, as Chris walked into the dealership, he was met with a surprise. He'd received a call from David Caldwell. His heart raced as he answered the phone, uncertain of what to expect. "Chris," David's voice came through the line, "I just wanted to say, well done. We've been watching your progress, and I have to say, we're impressed with the direction you're taking. The event was a great idea, and it's already making waves. Keep it up, and we'll continue to support you." Chris exhaled, the weight lifting from his shoulders. "Thank you, David. That means a lot." David chuckled. "We're in this together, Chris. Keep pushing, and you'll get there." As Chris hung up the phone, a wave of relief washed over him. He'd done it, he'd turned the corner. There was still work to be done, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like things were heading in the right direction. The pressure wasn't gone, but there was now hope on the horizon. The future of the dealership, and his partnership with Tesla, was no longer a matter of if, but when. The days following the successful Tesla event were a whirlwind. Chris could feel the weight of his responsibilities lightening with each passing moment. The dealership was finally starting to show signs of recovery, and Tesla's approval seemed more attainable than ever. Rachel, Greg, and the rest of the team were re-energized. There was a new sense of purpose in the air. The event had done wonders for morale, and Chris could see it in the way the staff interacted with customers. People were walking through the doors, eager to see the Teslas for themselves, and the buzz was palpable. But while things were looking up, Chris knew better than to get too comfortable. He couldn't afford to rest on his laurels, not when there was so much at stake. Tesla's corporate expectations still loomed over him like a storm cloud, ready to break at any moment. One morning, Chris sat in his office, going over the numbers again. The sales were improving, but they still weren't where they needed to be. Tesla's numbers were always ambitious, and their standards were relentless. The clock was ticking, and Chris knew the window for error was closing fast. Rachel walked in, carrying a cup of coffee in her hand. She smiled when she saw Chris, but her eyes were filled with concern. "How's it going?" she asked, setting the coffee down on his desk. Chris rubbed his eyes, looking at the sales metrics on his computer screen. "We're doing better, but we're still not hitting the numbers Tesla expects. The pressure's still there." Rachel sat down across from him. "Chris, I know it feels like we're running out of time, but you've got to trust in what we've built here. We've shown that we can turn things around. We've got the right people, the right message, and a loyal customer base. We just need to keep pushing forward." Chris looked at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of determination and doubt. "I hear you, Rachel, but it's more than just pushing forward. It's about proving to Tesla that we can be a top-tier dealership. I need to make sure I'm doing everything I can to secure that." Rachel nodded, understanding the pressure he was under. "Well, if anyone can do it, it's you. We've all got your back, Chris." Her words meant more to him than he could express. He wasn't in this alone, he had a team that believed in him, and that belief was more important than anything else. Later that day, Chris met with his team to strategize. The mood in the room was optimistic but focused. Everyone knew that they had made significant strides, but there was still work to be done. They were no longer just fighting to survive, they were fighting to thrive. "We've got a few weeks left before the next review from Tesla," Chris began, addressing the group. "We need to make sure we're hitting our sales targets, but we also need to continue providing the kind of service that makes Tesla stand out. It's not enough just to sell cars, we have to make people feel like they're part of something bigger, like they're making a real difference by choosing Tesla." Greg leaned forward, a determined look on his face. "I think we're all on the same page. We've got some loyal customers who've been with us since the beginning, but we need to cast a wider net. More outreach, more engagement. We need to build even stronger relationships with our community." Chris nodded, grateful for Greg's input. "Exactly. We've got a solid base, but we can't stop there. I want to see our salespeople actively engaging with potential customers, reaching out to them on social media, inviting them to come in for test drives, and showing them why Tesla is the future of transportation." Rachel added, "And we need to make sure we're highlighting the features that set Tesla apart. It's not just about the tech, it's about the environment, the innovation, the quality. If we can make people understand the impact their decision will have on the world, we'll win them over." Chris smiled at the enthusiasm in the room. It was clear that everyone was on the same page. They all believed in the Tesla mission, and now it was time to show the world why they did. Over the next few days, the team worked tirelessly, doubling down on their outreach efforts. They contacted every lead, hosted additional test drive events, and ramped up their social media presence. The dealership's phones rang off the hook as more and more people expressed interest in Tesla's revolutionary vehicles. At the same time, Chris spent countless hours in meetings with Tesla's corporate team, making sure he stayed in constant communication with David Caldwell. Tesla was watching closely, but they could see that things were starting to change at the dealership. Chris remained determined, but he also knew he couldn't let his team burn out. They needed to stay focused, but they needed balance too. One Friday afternoon, just a few days before the next review, Chris received a phone call from David. His heart skipped a beat as he answered the call, unsure of what to expect. "Chris," David's voice came through the line, "I just wanted to let you know that we've been closely monitoring your progress. We're impressed with the changes you've made. Your customer engagement is up, your sales are steadily increasing, and we can see that your team is more motivated than ever." Chris couldn't help but let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "That's great to hear, David. We've been working around the clock to make sure we're meeting Tesla's standards." David's voice softened. "And it shows. We've seen a marked improvement in your dealership's performance. If you keep this up, you'll not only meet your targets, you'll exceed them." Chris's heart surged with relief. "Thank you, David. That means a lot." David paused before speaking again. "I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think we're seeing the results we were hoping for. Just keep pushing, Chris. You're on the right track." After hanging up, Chris sat back in his chair, a wide grin spreading across his face. The validation from Tesla felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. They were on the right path. The storm wasn't over, but Chris felt more confident than ever that he and his team were going to make it through to the other side. As the review deadline approached, Chris knew that he had done everything he could to turn things around. It wasn't just about meeting Tesla's expectations, it was about proving to himself, his team, and his customers that they were more than capable of achieving greatness. The days leading up to Tesla's next evaluation felt like a blur. Chris could barely keep track of time as he juggled meetings, customer requests, and the constant pressure of trying to meet Tesla's ambitious goals. Each day felt like a new challenge, but it was also clear that his team was giving it their all. The dealership had transformed. What once felt like a sinking ship was now a buzzing hub of activity, full of energy and excitement. There was an undeniable momentum building, and Chris could feel it. People were no longer walking through the doors with skepticism, they were coming in with curiosity, eager to see what Tesla had to offer. The sales numbers were improving steadily, and customer satisfaction was at an all-time high. But there was still that nagging feeling in the back of Chris's mind. Was it enough? Tesla's expectations were always shifting, and he wasn't sure if they would recognize all the changes his team had made. Rachel, Greg, and the rest of the team were all on edge. They had worked so hard, but it wasn't just about the work they had already done, it was about proving themselves in this final evaluation. The stakes were higher than ever, and the uncertainty of the future weighed heavily on everyone's shoulders. On the morning of the review, Chris woke up early, unable to sleep through the anxiety. He went through his usual routine, coffee, a quick breakfast, a few minutes to clear his mind, but it felt like every moment brought him closer to something inevitable. He had to face the music. As Chris arrived at the dealership, he noticed that the usual morning buzz seemed different. There was an energy in the air, but it wasn't the usual hustle, it was the kind of charged silence that came before a big moment. Rachel was already in her office when Chris arrived. She stood by her desk, fidgeting with a piece of paper, her eyes distant. When she saw Chris, she put the paper down and smiled weakly. "We're ready for this, right?" she asked, her voice betraying the nerves that were hiding behind her calm demeanor. Chris nodded, trying to reassure her, though he felt the same nerves himself. "We've done everything we could, Rachel. All we can do now is trust the process." Greg entered the room just as Chris spoke, his eyes focused and intense. "The team's ready. We've been putting in the hours, staying late, and working on every detail. We've done the groundwork. It's time to show Tesla that we can be one of their top dealerships." Chris appreciated Greg's optimism, but the reality was always at the forefront of his mind. There were no guarantees in this business. No matter how hard they tried, there was always that lingering uncertainty. "All right," Chris said, clapping his hands together, trying to stir up some confidence. "Let's go out there and show them what we've got." The morning passed quickly. Chris and his team were fully immersed in final preparations, getting the dealership ready for the big day. Everything had to be perfect, the showroom had to shine, the cars had to be spotless, and the atmosphere had to feel welcoming and engaging. Tesla's corporate team had their eyes on them, and Chris didn't want to miss a single detail. By lunchtime, the review call finally came. Chris gathered his team in the conference room, a mixture of excitement and nerves in the air. Everyone took their seats, Chris standing at the front, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He felt like he was about to step into the ring for the fight of his life. "Hello, Chris," David Caldwell's voice came through the speakerphone, cool and measured as always. "I trust you're ready for the final evaluation. We've been watching your progress closely, and we're eager to see how the numbers align with your recent efforts." Chris cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady. "Absolutely, David. I'm confident that we've met the goals you've set for us. We've made significant strides in both sales and customer engagement, and I believe we've created a better overall experience for our customers." David was quiet for a moment, processing Chris's words. "I'm glad to hear that. But as you know, we hold our dealerships to very high standards. We've been looking at the data from your region. Your sales figures have increased, and your customer satisfaction ratings are up. However, there are still some areas where we believe there's room for improvement." Chris's heart sank, the words hitting harder than he expected. He had worked tirelessly, but it seemed like it still wasn't enough. "What do you need from us to close the gap?" Chris asked, his voice firm, though the uncertainty was still there. "Well, you've made progress, Chris," David continued. "But we need to see more consistent performance. The numbers are encouraging, but Tesla's vision requires dealerships to be exceptional across the board. It's not just about hitting quotas, it's about fostering a deeper connection with your customers and creating long-term relationships. Chris exhaled, understanding what David was saying. It wasn't just about the short-term results, it was about building trust, loyalty, and creating an environment where customers felt like they were part of the Tesla family. I understand, Chris said, his voice unwavering. We've been working on building those relationships. And we're not just focused on numbers, we want to create an experience that's about more than just selling cars. It's about bringing people into the Tesla community. David was quiet for a moment before responding. That's the kind of attitude we're looking for. Keep up the good work, Chris. We'll be keeping a close eye on your dealership over the next quarter. But for now, I think you've made a positive impact. Keep pushing, and we'll see what's possible. The call ended, and the room fell silent. The team exchanged uncertain glances, waiting for Chris to speak. Well, Chris said, breaking the silence. It's not a perfect score, but it's a step in the right direction. We've got more work to do, but I know we're on the right track. Rachel smiled, the tension easing from her shoulders. We've got this. We'll keep pushing forward. Greg grinned. I think we've shown them what we're capable of. Now, let's show them even more. Chris nodded. Exactly. We don't stop here. We keep moving forward. The evaluation wasn't perfect, but it was clear that Tesla saw the potential in the dealership, and more importantly, in Chris and his team. There was still work to be done, but the road to redemption had officially begun. In the weeks following Tesla's evaluation, Chris couldn't shake the sense that he was standing at a crossroads. The pressure was still there, but it had shifted. The feedback from Tesla had been a reality check, reminder that they weren't quite there yet. But it also came with a sense of possibility. Tesla had acknowledged their progress, and for Chris, that recognition was both a weight off his shoulders and a challenge to do more. Rachel, Greg, and the rest of the team didn't falter. They were more determined than ever. Every morning, the dealership doors opened with a renewed sense of purpose. The energy in the showroom was electric, literally and figuratively. There was something magnetic about the way customers were gravitating toward the cars, eager to see what all the hype was about. Chris had always known that Tesla's appeal went beyond just the product, it was the vision, the innovation, and the way the company had redefined what it meant to be a car brand. Now, it was about ensuring that everyone who walked into the dealership felt that same sense of excitement and possibility. But Chris also knew that there was no room for complacency. The next evaluation was still looming. And Tesla's standards were only going to get more demanding. It wasn't just about increasing sales, it was about creating an experience that could truly match the boldness of the Tesla brand. That afternoon, Chris called his leadership team together for an important meeting. The room was filled with anticipation as everyone took their seats. Chris stood at the front, looking at his team with a seriousness that was both reassuring and motivating. We've got a good start, Chris said, his voice strong but calm. Tesla's given us some positive feedback, but they've also made it clear that we need to push further. We've made great strides in sales, but now we need to focus on creating a customer experience that's not just good, it's exceptional. Greg leaned forward, his eyes sharp with focus. I think we're all on board, Chris. We've been doing a lot of outreach, and we've seen some fantastic engagement. But I agree, it's time to level up. We need to start thinking about how we can truly set ourselves apart. Rachel nodded. It's not just about the cars anymore. It's about what we stand for. We need to create a space where customers feel like they're becoming part of something revolutionary. When they leave, they should feel like they've made a decision that goes beyond just buying a car, they've joined the future. Chris smiled, impressed with how in sync everyone was. Exactly. It's about building an emotional connection. People need to feel like Tesla is a part of their lives, not just a brand they support. We have to embody that vision in everything we do. Over the next few weeks, Chris and his team implemented a series of changes that were designed to elevate the entire dealership experience. They revamped the showroom, creating an atmosphere that felt sleek, modern, and forward-thinking, just like the Tesla cars. They also trained the sales team to focus more on storytelling, encouraging them to connect with customers on a deeper level. It wasn't just about features and specs, it was about the journey and the impact Tesla was making on the world. They also started hosting exclusive events at the dealership, test drive experiences that were more than just a chance to try out the cars. They were designed to immerse potential customers in the Tesla lifestyle. Each event was carefully curated to showcase Tesla's commitment to innovation, sustainability, and the future of transportation. One evening, the dealership hosted an event that would become a turning point in their journey. It was a VIP test drive night, a carefully planned experience for some of the most high-profile potential customers in the area. Chris and his team worked tirelessly to make sure everything was perfect, from the decor to the refreshments to the personalized test drive routes. They even brought in some Tesla engineers to speak to the guests about the company's technology and vision for the future. The event went off without a hitch. The guests were blown away by the cars, but more importantly, they were captivated by the experience itself. It wasn't just about driving a car, it was about being a part of something groundbreaking. For the first time, Chris saw firsthand how the Tesla brand could resonate on a deeply emotional level. After the event, as Chris walked through the dealership, he felt a surge of pride. His team had pulled off something incredible. But more than that, he realized that they had done something that could truly set them apart from every other car dealership in the area. They had created an experience, not just a transaction. As the night drew to a close, Rachel approached Chris with a smile on her face. "That was incredible," she said, her voice full of excitement. "I think we've just created the kind of experience Tesla has been waiting for. This is what sets us apart." Chris nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment wash over him. "This is just the beginning. We've got a long way to go, but I think we're finally on the right track." Greg joined them, his face lighting up. "That was a game changer, Chris. I've never seen people so excited to drive a car. We've finally cracked it." Chris couldn't help but agree. The event had been a resounding success, but it was more than that. It had been a defining moment for the dealership. It was proof that they could not only meet Tesla's expectations but exceed them. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. The dealership's numbers continued to rise, and the positive feedback from customers was pouring in. Tesla's corporate team was taking notice, and Chris could feel that they were getting closer to securing a permanent spot as one of their top dealerships. But Chris also knew that they couldn't let up now. They had set a new standard, and it was up to them to keep pushing forward. One afternoon, just a few days after the VIP event, Chris received a call from David Caldwell. As always, the sound of David's voice on the other end sent a rush of anticipation through him. "Chris," David said, his tone warm but professional, "I wanted to check in and let you know that we've been closely monitoring your performance. The improvements we've seen at your dealership are impressive. You've really taken your team's performance to the next level, and I think it's safe to say that you're on track to become one of our most successful dealerships." Chris's heart raced. It was the validation he had been working for, but he knew it wasn't the end. There was still work to be done. "Thank you, David," Chris replied, his voice steady. "But we're not stopping here. We're just getting started." David chuckled. "I like that attitude. Keep it up, Chris. You've got something special going on there." As Chris hung up the phone, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The turning point had come. They had proven themselves capable of more than just surviving, they were on the path to thriving. And now, it was time to show Tesla, and the world, just what they were capable of. The weeks that followed were both exhilarating and exhausting. Chris's team was riding high after the success of the VIP event. Word had spread, and more customers were walking through the dealership doors. It felt like everything was finally clicking into place. But with success came new expectations, and Chris knew that they couldn't afford to slow down. The energy in the dealership was palpable. Customers were now coming in with a sense of excitement. Many of them had heard about the unique experiences and test drives, and they wanted to be a part of it. The sales team had become more confident, no longer just pushing cars, but sharing the story of Tesla with passion and conviction. Chris had noticed a shift in their mindset. It was no longer just about selling cars, it was about creating relationships and making a lasting impression. Tesla's corporate team was closely monitoring the dealership's progress, and Chris felt the weight of their eyes on him every day. The feedback they received was overwhelmingly positive, but the pressure to maintain that momentum was intense. One morning, as Chris was preparing for a busy day, he received a call from David Caldwell. Chris's heart skipped a beat. It had been a while since they had spoken directly, and he wasn't sure what to expect. "Chris," David's voice came through the line, sharp and clear, "I've been following your progress, and I must say, I'm impressed. You and your team have done an incredible job in turning things around." Chris could feel the weight lifting off his shoulders. This was the validation they had been working for. "Thank you, David. It's been a team effort. Everyone's been working hard to make sure we meet Tesla's standards." David continued, "It's more than just meeting standards, Chris. You're setting new benchmarks. And that's why I'm reaching out. We're considering featuring your dealership in an upcoming corporate campaign. We want to highlight the kind of transformation you've achieved, how you turned your team around and became a model for success." Chris was stunned. The thought of being in the spotlight was both thrilling and intimidating. This was a huge opportunity, one that could further cement their place as a top-tier Tesla dealership. But with the spotlight came a whole new level of responsibility. "I don't know what to say," Chris replied, trying to keep his composure. "This is incredible. But I have to ask, what's the catch? What do you need from us?" David's laugh came through the phone. "No catch, Chris. We want to showcase your success, but we also want you to continue pushing the envelope. The campaign will shine a light on what's working, but it will also raise the bar. Are you ready for that kind of attention?" Chris took a deep breath. "Absolutely. We're ready." "Great," David said. "I'll have my team coordinate the details. Expect a call soon. And remember, the pressure is going to increase. But I'm confident you and your team can handle it." As the call ended, Chris sat back in his chair, processing what had just happened. A corporate campaign? The kind of exposure that could catapult them to the forefront of Tesla's network. It was everything they had worked for, and more. But there was also the undeniable reality that this would be their biggest test yet. There would be no hiding now. Every move would be scrutinized. Chris couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement mixed with the pressure of what lay ahead. This was the moment that could define their legacy. He gathered his team for a meeting later that afternoon, sharing the news with them. The room was filled with stunned silence for a moment, but then it erupted into cheers and high fives. Everyone knew the significance of this opportunity. Rachel was the first to speak. "This is huge, Chris. We've worked so hard to get here. This is our moment to show the world what we're made of." Greg, always the practical one, quickly brought the team back down to earth. "Okay, but let's not forget, we need to be prepared. Tesla's campaign is going to put us under a microscope. Everything we do will be scrutinized. We need to be flawless." Chris nodded. "Greg's right. We need to keep our focus, stay sharp, and make sure we're living up to the standard we've set. This isn't just about looking good for the cameras, it's about showing the world that we're not just a dealership, we're a part of the Tesla movement." The team agreed, and they immediately got to work preparing for the campaign. They began refining every aspect of the dealership experience, ensuring that it would be picture-perfect when the cameras arrived. They fine-tuned the customer service process, polished the showroom, and made sure the team was fully aligned on Tesla's values and vision. For the next few weeks, Chris's life became a whirlwind. Meetings with Tesla's corporate team, endless preparations, and a constant stream of media inquiries made it feel like there was no time to breathe. But through it all, Chris could see the transformation that was taking place, not just in the dealership, but in his own leadership. He had grown from a manager trying to survive into a leader who was now steering the ship with confidence. The day of the campaign shoot arrived. The dealership was buzzing with energy. A small crew from Tesla had arrived early to set up, and Chris could feel the weight of the moment settling in. The cameras were rolling, and there was no turning back now. The team had done everything they could to ensure that the day would go smoothly. They had worked tirelessly to make sure every detail was in place, from the lighting to the cars on display. Even the smallest aspects were carefully coordinated. As the cameras began filming, Chris found himself standing at the center of it all. There was a sense of calm that washed over him as he spoke to the camera, sharing the story of the dealership's transformation. He was no longer just talking about numbers and figures, he was talking about the journey, the struggle, and the pride he felt in his team's success. And when the shoot was over, Chris felt a sense of pride that was hard to describe. They had done it. They had not only risen to Tesla's expectations, they had exceeded them. The campaign would showcase their hard work, dedication, and the relentless pursuit of excellence that had become the dealership's hallmark. As Chris watched the crew pack up for the day, he couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. This was just the beginning. With Tesla's spotlight on them, there were no limits to what they could achieve. The weeks following the campaign shoot were a whirlwind of anticipation. Tesla's corporate campaign had officially launched, and the dealership was being featured as a model of transformation and success. The exposure was more than Chris had ever imagined, and it seemed like every day brought a new opportunity. The dealership's reputation was growing rapidly, and they were attracting attention from more high-profile customers than ever before. But with success came new challenges. The dealership's sales numbers skyrocketed, and the volume of customers visiting the showroom increased exponentially. It was exhilarating, but it was also overwhelming. Chris had always thrived under pressure, but this was a different kind of pressure. They weren't just trying to meet Tesla's standards anymore, they were being held up as a shining example of what a Tesla dealership should be. And that spotlight, while exhilarating, came with its own set of expectations. One morning, Chris walked into the dealership, and as usual, the atmosphere was buzzing with energy. Salespeople were busy making calls, greeting customers, and showcasing the latest Tesla models. But Chris could sense a shift in the air. There was a feeling of nervous excitement, a realization that they were no longer just trying to impress Tesla, they were now representing the brand on a global scale. Rachel, Greg, and the rest of the team had been working overtime to keep up with the surge in business. But Chris could tell that the strain was starting to show. There were longer hours, more stress, and an increasing number of challenges. It was becoming clear that the dealership's success was now directly tied to Tesla's overall reputation. If they faltered, it wouldn't just affect their numbers, it would have a ripple effect throughout the entire network of dealerships. As Chris walked through the showroom, he noticed that the sales team was handling the influx of customers with their usual enthusiasm. But there was something different in the air. There was tension, an undercurrent of uncertainty that wasn't there before. Chris approached Rachel, who was standing near a group of customers, her face lit up with her usual smile. But even she seemed a little on edge. "Hey, Rachel, how's everything going?" Chris asked, his voice steady but concerned. Rachel gave him a quick smile, but Chris could tell she was masking something. "It's going well, Chris. We've been getting a lot of traffic, and the customers seem really interested." But, she hesitated, "there's been some pressure. People are expecting a lot from us. I mean, a lot. Tesla's watching, and we're under a microscope." Chris nodded. He understood exactly what she meant. The dealership's success was now inextricably linked to the entire Tesla brand, and they couldn't afford to fail. The weight of that responsibility was heavier than ever. Just then, Greg approached, his expression serious. "Chris, we've got a problem," he said, his voice low. "The inventory levels are dangerously low. We've been selling more cars than we can keep up with, and our suppliers are telling us it'll be weeks before we get another shipment." Chris's heart sank. This was the last thing they needed. The demand for Tesla vehicles was at an all-time high, and running out of stock could severely impact their momentum. It wasn't just about losing sales, it was about losing trust. If Tesla's customers came in expecting to drive away with a new car and couldn't get one, they might start looking elsewhere. "This is a problem," Chris said, running a hand through his hair. "We need to figure something out fast. We can't afford to let this slip." Greg nodded. "I'll contact the suppliers and see if there's anything they can do to speed up the process. But it might take some time." Chris turned back to Rachel, who was still managing customers. "Rachel, can you make sure the team is on the same page? We need to be transparent with customers about the situation, but we also need to make sure they're still excited about the brand. We can't let this hurt the experience we've worked so hard to build." "I've got it," Rachel said, her tone determined. "We'll handle it. We'll make sure they know we're doing everything we can to get them their cars." As the day went on, Chris couldn't shake the feeling of urgency. The dealership was under more scrutiny than ever, and the pressure was mounting. The last thing he wanted was for Tesla to look at their performance and see a failure. They had worked too hard to get to this point. That evening, as Chris sat in his office going over numbers and inventory reports, his phone buzzed. It was a message from David Caldwell. "Chris, I've been following up with the team. We're noticing some hiccups in your inventory. This isn't ideal, especially with the kind of attention your dealership is getting. Let me know if you need help resolving this." Chris stared at the message for a moment. He knew this was it, the final test. Tesla had been impressed with their success so far, but this was the moment where everything could fall apart. If he didn't manage this situation well, it wouldn't just affect the dealership, it would affect his entire relationship with Tesla. He took a deep breath and dialed David's number. The line rang once, twice, and then David picked up. "Chris," David's voice was calm but direct, "I've seen the reports. We're getting some concerns about the inventory issues. What's your plan?" Chris didn't hesitate. "David, I know this is a serious issue, and we're working on a solution. We're in constant contact with our suppliers, and we're doing everything we can to get more stock. I'm personally overseeing the process to make sure we're not letting our customers down. I won't let this affect our momentum." There was a pause on the other end of the line before David spoke again. "I appreciate your dedication, Chris. But I need to be clear, we're watching closely. This is a critical time. You can't afford to fall short now." Chris felt the weight of those words, but he knew David was right. The final test had arrived. And there was no turning back now. The days that followed were some of the most stressful of Chris's career. The pressure of maintaining Tesla's high standards while dealing with the inventory shortage seemed insurmountable at times. Every day felt like a race against the clock. Chris spent hours on the phone with suppliers, trying to get the stock they desperately needed. Every conversation brought new challenges, new delays, and a growing sense of urgency. The team, however, rallied behind him. Rachel kept the sales floor buzzing with excitement, ensuring customers that the cars would be arriving soon and that their interest was valued. Greg, always the strategist, worked overtime to find creative ways to keep customers engaged, offering them incentives like personalized test drives, exclusive updates, and a promise of priority delivery once the cars arrived. But even with all their efforts, Chris couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a tightrope. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. Then, one afternoon, Chris received a call from an unexpected source. It was from Elon Musk himself. "Chris," Elon's voice came through the phone, calm but direct, "I've been keeping track of how your dealership has been doing. I wanted to personally reach out and say that I'm impressed with how you've handled the spotlight and the pressure. I know things have been tough recently with the inventory issue, but I've been hearing nothing but good things about your team." Chris's heart raced. This was the moment. He had always dreamed of talking to Elon Musk, but never in a million years had he imagined it would be like this, on the verge of potentially losing everything. "Thank you, Elon," Chris replied, trying to steady his voice. "We've been working around the clock to get things back on track. The team is doing everything they can, and we're pushing our suppliers to expedite the deliveries." Elon's voice softened. "I understand how difficult it can be. But here's the thing, Chris, what you've built at your dealership isn't just about selling cars. It's about building trust, creating an experience. And that's why I'm calling. We're going to help you out. We're sending a priority shipment your way. It'll arrive sooner than expected." Chris couldn't believe his ears. A priority shipment from Tesla itself? This was the lifeline they had been waiting for. "Are you serious?" Chris asked, his voice filled with disbelief. That's incredible. Thank you so much. You've earned it, Chris," Elon said, his tone firm but encouraging. "Keep doing what you're doing. Keep pushing forward. This is just a bump in the road, and I believe in you and your team." As the call ended, Chris sat in stunned silence for a moment. This was a game changer. With the priority shipment on the way, the pressure was starting to lift. But he knew there was still work to be done. They had to keep the momentum going, keep their reputation intact, and ensure the transition back to normalcy was smooth. Over the next few days, the dealership buzzed with energy as the new stock arrived. The showroom floor quickly filled with the latest Tesla models, and the customers who had been waiting eagerly to take delivery of their vehicles were finally able to do so. It was like a switch had been flipped, the dealership was back on track, and the tension that had hung in the air for weeks finally started to dissipate. But the true test came when the spotlight shifted once again. The corporate team from Tesla arrived for a final visit to evaluate the dealership's progress. Chris knew this would be their chance to show Tesla that they could handle the pressure, even when the odds were stacked against them. Tesla's team walked through the showroom, examining every detail, from the customer service experience to the presentation of the cars on the floor. Chris felt his heart pounding in his chest as he led them on a tour, answering questions and addressing concerns. Every step was under scrutiny, and he knew that this was the final judgment. Finally, the corporate team gathered in Chris's office for a debrief. David Caldwell was there, along with several other key Tesla executives. Chris sat at the head of the table, his team by his side. David spoke first. "Chris, I've heard nothing but positive things about how your dealership has been handling things. You've turned this place into a model of success. You've not only met Tesla's expectations, you've exceeded them. Your leadership, your team, your vision, it's all been impressive." Chris's heart swelled with pride, but he couldn't let himself get too comfortable. He knew this was just the beginning. "Thank you, David. But I couldn't have done it without the incredible team I have here. We've worked together every step of the way, and I'm proud of everything we've accomplished." David smiled. "That's exactly why I wanted to say this in person. We've been watching closely, and we've decided to offer you a long-term partnership. We want you to remain at the forefront of Tesla's dealership network. We believe in your ability to keep pushing the boundaries, and we want you to continue leading the way." Chris felt a rush of emotions. This was the moment he had been working for. The recognition, the validation, it was everything he had hoped for. But more than that, it was a chance to continue building on everything they had started. "I'm honored, David," Chris said, his voice steady but filled with gratitude. "And I'm ready. We're just getting started." As the meeting ended and Tesla's team began to leave, Chris found himself standing in the showroom, looking around at the familiar faces of his team. They had been through so much together, hard times, good times, moments of doubt and moments of triumph. And now, they were standing on the edge of something even bigger. Chris knew that the journey wasn't over. In many ways, it had only just begun. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. They had made it through the storm, and they were stronger for it. As Chris looked around at the dealership, he smiled. They had not only survived the pressure, they had thrived. And now, with the future wide open in front of them, there was nothing they couldn't achieve. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?